The MTA got an emergency allocation last budget cycle from the New York State Legislature of $108 million. This is in addition to the money that they already got from the federal government to help recover from Sandy. And they said, well, you know, we need it in order to be able to get people to work. $108 million. We go to the state legislature and say, we need 7.
Right.
And they look at us as if we've just landed. This problem is part of the broader economic development strategy. So when we talk about Howard Zemsky, the chairperson of the NFTA, I also look at that as the guy who controls the Buffalo Billion.
Yeah.
We can't find $7 million. Now, to credit, the NFTA has done an awful lot to hear our voice when we speak. There is a disability NFTA commissioner, Margot Downey, who would have loved to have been here today. There are disability representations on every public committee the NFTA has, and an advisory committee for people with disabilities that has met monthly for 30 years. If this matters to you, it's gotta matter. Not just when we have a meeting today, not just when the 164 days runs out,
Right.
but the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. Because, and I'm gonna pick because it was the first thing I heard when I came into the room. Here's the NFTA. The NFTA never leaves somebody in that 5-minute window until there's a radio communication with control that releases that driver to leave. I happen to know that radio communication takes longer than 1.5 minutes to do. So even if they're there, they wait 5 minutes, they twiddle their thumbs, they don't leave until they've called the NFTA and the NFTA releases them to leave. So it's really important to remember that it's about the top of that window. That having been said, if the guy is at 5 minutes and he calls and he gets released, when the NFTA knows they got people coming down from a second floor looking out a window, we talk about NFTA being curb to curb, but the Federal Transit Administration has thought differently of some of those things, and have even said that if you need a reasonable accommodation in order to use paratransit, you're entitled to ask for it. Under the ADA, you're entitled to ask for it. So, you've got a problem with people getting left behind. You got to tell people. You got to get on the phone with the NFTA, you got to get on the phone with us, you got to get on the phone with your legislators, you got to send a letter, you got to come to the advisory committee meeting and say this is happening, because no one can do anything about it until we know.
We call every time it happens.
Yeah.
We really do. We don't,
Yeah.
we guys.
But it's just that example. You want high quality transit service, you have to be vigilant to get it. That's my thing. I'm sorry.
I'm going to piggyback on that 1 second. I worked for the Buffalo News for 25 years as a senior editor and could not get the Buffalo News to take issues of disability like transportation, housing, unemployment, all 3 of which we know are critical, seriously enough to actually write serious news stories. They love their little inspiration stories. It won't happen until consumers and parents start writing letters to the editor saying, these are the issues in our community. These are our children being left for an hour and a half waiting for a bus or not getting the service on a school bus. It has to come from us for the news to start noticing and actually taking it seriously. We're very silent in the media's impression. We're very silent. Therefore, our issues don't matter.
I just real quick on that, I agree with that, and thank you, for your comments on that. The only thing I would say to that, because we have about 230 people, so I think it's a matter of, and I think that's great, you got it right. But here's the problem, and here's where it's not people not wanting to. That's why meetings like this are great. I didn't know it, and people, it's an awareness thing. Like when they come to ours, and we look at the watch, it's 5 after. And sometimes when paratransit comes there, they're gone in that 5 minutes for the most part, and we make that phone call. But it is good to know too, that you gotta do the right thing. And the other thing is that this is 220 people, that's hard to do, you know what I mean, on a regular basis, but it is good to know that that is the next step to take.
Yeah,
To
I'm
right.
talking about
To-
the larger problem, not every time the bus leaves.
No, I understand that.
But
Yeah, I got you, I
But I
understand.
guarantee you, and my friend from Assemblymember Kern's office is gonna guarantee this, you start developing patterns in poor service, and those people start writing even postcards in their own handwriting to their legislative offices, these people are gonna start assigning people and moving, because one of the things I can tell you, the old political adage, for every person who signs a petition, they think 3 people would have but didn't. For every person that writes a postcard in hand, that it's 5 to 7 people that might have but didn't. For every person that writes a letter, that's 10 people. For every person that visits, it's 25 to 100 people, depending upon what government entity you believe. So it's a whole thing about putting your signature on something. If you got 220 people that this is a semi-regular problem for, and they want to speak and they're having difficulty speaking, you call my office, I will come over, we'll help them write a letter, they can put their signatures at the bottom, and we'll send that sucker right off.
Your phone number?
836-0822.
I'm sorry.
Extension 101.
That was fast, can you do this one more time? 836?
836.
About that time is just make sure that they're all following our rules and our regulations.
Absolutely.
I got 836.
0822.
0822, and the name?
Extension 101, and my name is Todd.
Thank you, Tad.
Okay?
I'll be calling.
He made a video for you, he sat down with
Mhm.
Nathan, and they made a video together as to what happened to him. But the media just didn't seem to care. I tried all of our news stations several times in the first few days, as well as the first few
You know-
weeks, to get them to touch it. I asked our church, several people at our church wrote letters, made phone calls. Nathan's physical therapist wrote the Buffalo News a couple of times. Nobody would touch the story. Nobody wanted to admit fault, and let's take some action so this doesn't happen again to anyone, because it shouldn't have happened to Nathan, it shouldn't have happened to anyone, disabled or otherwise.
Right.
When you talked about, and that's a really good point that you made about making your voices heard, about writing those letters and writing those postcards. Postcards caught my attention. The Adirondack Club has gotten a lot of laws made, laws that were important to save our green lands and so on, our parks and so on. At every meeting, there's a stack of postcards at each table. And at every meeting, they talk about the issue that they're concerned with. If you make those postcards available at your meetings and you talk to the issue that you want to address, getting those people at each meeting, no matter what kind of advocacy you're part of, obviously transportation is a huge issue for all of us here. And it's a wonderful way to flood the offices of our legislators, because it doesn't matter quite so much what you say or how you say it, but if you're addressing an issue, you've got 1,000 postcards hitting every one of the legislators, especially the ones on the transportation committees, you're gonna catch their attention.
That was my next question, how to get some postcards.
Yeah, the one thing that I'd say about that, and I've done this, my agency's done it for over 30 years now. Legislators are really sensitive to what they call astroturfing, which is someone will print a postcard for you and say, put your signature at the bottom of it and stick it in the mail. That doesn't do it. What you gotta do is you gotta have a meeting on the issue. The postcards have to be blank. And you have to say to them, what I want you to do is write on the back of the postcard, fair funding for paratransit, send Buffalo 7.8 million, or whatever. I just pulled that out of the top of my head. If you write it, and you sign it, and you send it, they're gonna go, well, you don't have somebody telling people what they're saying. They're writing this. Obviously, there's a group of people together. They're coordinated. They're speaking. And then they start thinking about that multiplier in your head, because you have no idea as an advocate how many emails I get about print this and sign this postcard or use this electronic petition. Please, please, please don't fall into that, because anybody can type anybody else's name on an electronic petition. I've seen Barack Obama's name on petitions for the KKK. Seriously. Okay? You gotta write it. You gotta make your voice heard in such a way that it's an individual voice, because that's the way Gant's gonna come here. Now, the one other thing I'll say for my friends in Rochester is, one of the reasons why you're so successful is because you've got a strong independent living center who's willing to go that extra mile. Okay, and you nod and smile to Bruce when you see him and tell him I said this. Because the one thing in this community I have worked very hard to avoid is the need to pull that final lever. And you know what that lever is? Lawsuit. We have worked very hard to make sure that we don't need to go into federal court on the NFTA for anything that they do. We did it once, I think about 10 years ago, about stop announcement compliance. And where is stop announcement compliance today? At the time that we went there, it was 52%. One driver out of two, if you were lucky. Today, as of the last NFTA meeting I was at, stop announcement compliance averages at 94%.
What does it mean, Todd, stop announcement?
When you get on a fixed route bus, for those people who don't ride paratransit, when you get on a fixed route bus, you should hear the driver calling the stops for you, or one of those automated voices. Anybody who's local around here, the lady who used to do traffic for Channel 7 is the voice on the automated system, and she'll tell you what street you're approaching. You can also ask for a particular street to be announced if, because you're blind, you need to know when it's coming, or you got a developmental disability and you might not necessarily remember, like I do whenever I drive to this building. I forget how close it actually is to where I live. So they're supposed to reasonably accommodate you and do that. And when they weren't, the community got so upset with the fact that the NFTA wasn't hearing us, and that was before you even, that they went to federal court. NFTA did something that Rochester Regional Transit Authority doesn't do. NFTA actually had a meeting and settled it, and had quarterly meetings with the executive staff to settle the issue. Rochester doesn't do that, unfortunately. They'll go all the way with a lawsuit. But the thing is, you keep winning. I haven't quite figured out, how we manage that yet, but the community keeps winning.
Could you guys share with us a little bit of your accomplishments, what you've been able to do, transit-wise? That Todd is so strongly alluding to.
Not allowed to speak about areas that are not my own.
There was a lawsuit. Actually, CBR was part of that lawsuit. The Public Interest Law Office of Rochester was involved, did pro bono work on it. And I always get this confused, but I believe the people who are making the complaint are called the plaintiffs. The plaintiffs won. They actually did win. They won actually no money for themselves, but reportedly won the accommodation of the service that they were looking for. It's been a while, and so I've lost all of the details of that
That's okay.
particular
Since you
litigation.
started it, I can help you out.
Good.
They got next day service scheduling. They got service scheduling in the evening, which they were being denied. There were deliberate uses of paratransit parity that were meant to deliberately discourage people from riding. Routes were scheduled at 5:30 in the morning so that paratransit trips could only be scheduled at 5:30 in the morning, thus convincing people not to use it. All of those practices were required to cease.
So essentially, in many, many ways, they did win. And that's all good and dandy, but there are still a lot of issues
Yeah.
with our paratransit, and I dare say, any paratransit in the United States, let alone New York State. Right? It's a large issue, and it's a large issue for the disability community in general. And I agree that I think the only way we get to deal with those issues is to be very vocal about them. And to make sure that you do contact your legislators, because they're the ones that write the bills that either fund or draw into law the laws that need to change. And not just your state legislators. You should be talking with your federal legislators as well. because
So the
they
more
hold
people
the
they
issues.
hear from, the faster that change, the more seriously they're gonna take it, and the faster that
And the
change is
thing I'm
gonna come
gonna say to
about.
you is-
Okay.
The thing I would say to you is, I'd do it right now. Because the budget process is gonna start really soon. The governor's office is finalizing his version of the budget. He'll release it right after State of the State, which is the first week in January. And then that's when the legislature starts talking about their versions of the budget. So if you want transit to be an issue in the budget, you gotta talk about it now so that they know it's an item that needs to be in the budget. All right, and I'll say to you, one thing that I know, every time I talk about it, people are completely flummoxed. If we don't have transportation, if we can't live independently and safely in the community, where are we gonna end up? We're gonna end up in nursing homes and hospitals. I don't know if you did this when I wasn't here, but we'll do it now anyway.
Go ahead.
Nursing homes and hospitals. Anybody want to take a guess as to how much it costs to be in a nursing home for a year? We'll play a little Price is Right, higher or lower?
It's over $150,000.
Not that high yet.
It's close.
Well, higher. Yeah, it is close actually. One more.
But the thing of it is, they won't even accept you unless you have $200,000.
You have how much?
200,000.
Yeah, you gotta,
If you
you
wanna
gotta
go,
pay
if
for,
you have
gotta
to go.
pay for approximately 2 years of your housing if it's private pay. The average cost in a nursing home stay, according to Department of Health this week, is $104,000 per person per year. Now, since we know that 65% of our Medicaid recipients, or slightly higher in some areas like Western New York, it's closer to 70, are Medicaid recipients where Medicaid is paying the $104,000, we have arguments to make, which is why, and you used it earlier, $52,000 to provide daily access to the DDRO on East and West Road. We can't figure out a way to find 52 grand a year. It's more than just those 3 jobs, by the way. It's the self-advocates that go to that site for program. It's the people that might need to go there for training
And
or.
Todd, could I add something?
Mhm.
The new thing, the front door. If there's not transportation out there for those meetings, for those
Yep.
introductory meetings, the front door is closed.
But here's the thing. I look at that number, $52,000, and then I look at $104,000 per person per year for nursing home stays, and I'm absolutely flummoxed as to how we budget. So I say to you, you want to start writing postcards now, you start writing postcards, you start writing letters that say to your local legislators and to the guys down in New York City, because they need to hear this too, transportation committee people, that Buffalo needs the 7.8 million, that they have to go back to a better, more balanced formula. You gotta do that now, because if we don't, it'll be a thing that they'll try to engineer negotiations in the budget. And Bill will be the first to tell you, I don't know, 100, 150 issues a week on the budget once
Yeah.
they start talking about it?
You get inundated by lobbyists when you're in Albany,
Yep.
you know. You have a day that's specifically, given to lobbyists, and you will get a dozen, on that day, for separate issues, all separate issues. You came and visit us, right?
We always do.
If he likes the.
Which, by the way, will be for those people that want to know and want to go, it's the 25th of February. Give my office a call. We normally have either a bus or a group of people that go. If you care about the independent living issues, I'm glad to talk to you about going.
And of course, again, once you're isolated in your own home, I address mostly people with developmental challenges. I have a daughter as well. Once you're isolated in your own home, it flies in the face of the Olmstead Act. As we're trying to move people out of institutions, as we're trying to move them into the community and integrate them, if of all the services and supports that they're going to need aren't funded, they are going to be isolated without that transportation component, and that's another issue to be talking about. If you have children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, I think you're going to want to talk to the folks on the MHDD committee and the mental health committee, Assembly and Senate. When you're talking about writing letters to them, do it now, the same idea, because transportation feeds into that for just about everybody here. And we've done, I'm a member, Glenda and I are members of Family Advocates of Heritage Christian Services. We go to Albany every year on Lobby Day, and we go around and we talk not only to our local legislators that represent us in Albany, but we go to the people who populate the MHDD committees. And we really talk about, we bring families, have the families talk about the issues. You're also well versed here. You speak well to the issue. And it's important, again, to make yourself available to the people that make the decisions for you and let them know what you need.
Actually, last year we went the day after. We went on Wednesday, and we were able to get a lot more appointments, and we had a lot more face-to-face, because we did go when all the rest of them weren't there. But also, your mental health people, Carlucci, Gunther, make sure you visit them, because they'll be able to help you, along with Gant and several of the others. Look up on your computers and whatever, and you can see just who's on what committee. And whatever your priority is, and today it's transportation, make sure you visit not just your own, but the chairperson of each assembly and senate. Go to mental health. When we started going there, they were surprised that we came, but they were also surprised how educated we were on the problems, and they've asked us to come back several times. So broaden it. Don't just limit yourself to Kearns. That's your representative.
It's okay, I've got cards.
If that's your representative. We were there.
Right,
We
right.
went there because we also have a group in Buffalo. But make sure the others that are also in that group of your concern, your transportation, or your developmentally disabled, or, whatever. The more people you talk to, the more letters you write, the more they'll know you when you walk down that hall. And the more they get to know you, and one of the best things to do, if you can, bring your child, bring your adult.
I agree.
Thank you.
Is I'm going to point to my partner in crime, Bill, here, because you said we got a lot more FaceTime. Them knowing you is the second step. You knowing them is the first step.
Right.
You got to know who your legislators are, who the power brokers are, and this is the guy in every office you want to know. Now, you gotta understand, I love Mickey Kearns, used to be a common council member, I used to see him all the time. He's an assembly person, he's a little busy. And I get this all the time, I didn't get a chance to meet with my assemblyman, I didn't get a chance to meet with my senator. All I met with was an aide. Man, oh man, did these people get, I mean, even that quote all by itself. But this is the guy who's got the assemblyman's ear on this issue. So when he starts getting letters about stuff, the first thing he's gonna do is call a bill and go, wait, what is this community up to? Why are they so bothered about this? You get to know him, he gets to know you, he's gonna call you up and find out that answer, and he's gonna go right to the legislator and tell him. And that right there is the true definition of power. That's how lobbyists do it when they don't have the money.
We had a breakfast just yesterday in Rochester, legislative breakfast. We invited, what, 23?
Right.
Out of the 23, we had an aide or the legislator. We had 17 come. And we didn't invite we invited county, we invited state and federal. And they were all listening. They stayed around afterwards. They talked to the parents. They gave out their cards. We gave them a cookie. One of our groups.
With that, they accept the cookie as an item of value. Don't do that.
But anyway, it was a lot of work to put together, but it was very worthwhile because we also had parents telling their stories, those that cannot go to Albany because they are tied down. I shouldn't say tied, they are attending to their loved one that cannot be left alone because they haven't been able to find the help to come in and do it or take that person to Albany.
Right.
But they love seeing it, so we were able to bring in more people, you know, in wheelchairs or whatever by doing it. So that's something too. I think there's going to be some in here in Buffalo area too.
I just want to give my number. It's 608-6099-716. Just so everybody has it in case we run out of cards. My email address is licataw@assembly.state.ny.us. Okay, 716-608-6099 is my phone number. We'll work our hardest to try and get the chairman of the Senate Committee on Transportation, or OPWDD, mental health, and also the assembly chairs of the transportation and mental health as well to discuss this issue.
I agree that they are very helpful because I've talked to your office setting up appointments.
Thank you.
Bill, your first meeting with everybody involves lunch, right?
His first meeting involves donuts.
Yeah, pulled pork sandwiches for BJ. Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely, we do.
Are there people here who would like to share their story who haven't spoken yet about some of their issues with transportation?
Well, can I just ask, are there any other options? We have to get my son to work. This is my problem. He has to get to work. Besides paying for a private cab, which costs us more than he makes, and he would be better off staying home and not working financially, but he loves his job and he loves going to work. Besides paratransit and private cab, are there any other options? Does anyone know of anything?
Well, I'm gonna do this a little differently. I'm gonna ask you, if you took his disability out of the picture, what would the options normally be for anybody to go to work?
He would have, like my other kids, they bought a car and they would drive to work.
Okay.
Carpool with someone?
It is
Exactly.
important to separate, is it a every citizen issue or a citizen with a disability issue.
Very good point.
You know, so it's two separate conversations, and while it doesn't always seem easy to swallow that, you have to make that separation
But,
and realize the business models of the bus systems and cabs, and
Yep.
so it is important to look at that. And so I know a lot of times when we work with people and are faced with that challenge, they live in rural areas, we have to look at other options. If you can't drive for whatever reason, what are your options? Natural supports in your life, family, friends, can you private pay somebody to help you with that? It involves a lot of creativity, and it is very specific to each person's situation.
well, and there's nothing that says that a person with a disability can't own a car and get somebody else to drive it. Believe it or not, that's how visually impaired people do it that have professional lives. There are things in relation to mobility management, because if somebody says to me they're eligible for para, my first question is always, how close is the bus to your house? What's the barrier in getting them on a fixed route bus to get them to work? Are there too many transfers? Is it a problem with him not being able to get to the bus or from the bus to the boarding location? Look at how you can solve those issues locally with supports. Transportation options become open. Because one of the arguments that we make is not everybody, and I'm as fervent an advocate on transportation as you can get. I am in meetings on paratransit almost every day of the week. I am not a paratransit eligible customer. I'm not.
Because of where you live?
No, because I am physically able to board a bus,
Okay.
to get off a bus and get from a disembarkment point to where it is I need to go. You're only eligible for para if, by virtue of your disability, fixed route is almost impossible. So the first question is why? What part of that can we fix? Because if he's paratransit eligible and we can figure out a way to get him on that bus to get him to work in the morning, do you know how much that costs him? Technically right now, unless NFT has changed the policy, nothing. So we look at saying, what can we do to chain those supports? The other thing is anything that you do, if he has to get a car, if he's got to get special transportation, you talk about it costing more than you make. Well, if he's working, he's going to do one thing that everybody here who works does. We pay taxes. And all of that stuff is deductible every year. If you need special transportation to get to work, even, the Social Security Administration has a classification for your job, which is called subsidized employment. And when you have subsidized employment, the cost for transportation is taken out of what you make before the federal government decides to start cutting your benefits. Get benefits advisement first. Figure out what the general barriers to transportation are. Then look at what your choices are. Does that help you?
Maybe.
It's okay. The
But
Independent Living
there
Center
are-
has people that can do that.
But there are no other, I mean, anything else, any other transportation services that are available in the community are for other things, correct? Not job related. Correct.
Well, it depends on what the funding source is. I mean, I know OPWDD's got 5 or 6 funding source classifications. They do have an employment one, but it's for very few riders, and I know that those riders are almost always maxed out. But what they're talking about now, and one of the other buzzes that you hear, just to get us away from the NFTA for a minute, because the poor lady gets more than enough heat than she can stand, they talk about mobility management. Because you're absolutely right. How do I get him to work? I want him to work. If he doesn't work, all he's going to do is sit home and collect benefits. How do I get him to do that? How do I teach him about a work ethic? At what point is getting to work more costly than going to work? I want to be able to tell that story to OPWDD. I want to be able to tell that story to the feds. I want to be able to say this is one of the reasons why people with disabilities are 73% unemployed. Because you know, they wrote the ADA, they wrote Title I, they said everybody has to have equal consideration in being able to get a job and get benefits and employment. But nobody ever told us that they do anything about the barriers to getting us a job. So it's actually a longer story about the ADA. That's all the ADA was when they wrote it, was an employment bill.
For informational purposes, you wanna share with everybody OPWD's initiative to get people to work?
Yes, because, I'm gonna say to you two things. Recently, right before they scheduled this meeting to appear, I was in Albany and the state of New York had released their Olmstead plan. Okay? And that's based on a federal court decision that says that our right to live independently in the community is protected by the ADA. That the state cannot, and the state must, allow us to receive services in the most integrated setting. Well, states have been supposed to be putting together plans about how they're going to do that. Olmstead plan was revealed in early October. As part of the plan, here's OPWDD running to catch up. They've got a goal that says they're going to get 700 people gainfully employed in the community, OPWDD does. And the head of the regional office here, the head of the office in Region 1 here, that your story is his biggest concern.
I'll give you the number.
Yeah, we can get them jobs,
But we can't get them there.
but we can't get them there to get them to the jobs. So eventually OPWDD is going to need to expand that employment pool. So where you start is you say, I've looked at everything. Here's what we can do in terms of an independent living plan. Here's what my son or daughter wants to do. I can't get them there. How do I do that? Because just like we come to this meeting and I say to you, if transportation is important, you gotta be ever vigilant, here's where it gets really hard, which is why I'm always a half hour late for things. Okay? Here's where it's really hard. This isn't the only meeting. When OPWDD writes its funding plan as to how they're gonna spend the $1.2 billion that they have as part of the state's budget, they have public hearings where parents and people with disabilities come and they say what their priorities are, what their demands are of OPWDD to spend the budget. Do you know what they've said about transportation in the last 2 5-year cycles? Nobody's talking about getting us to work. What they're talking about is the fact that we're stuck at home and we never get to be with our friends or our families. So they wrote a couple of plans to do some social transportation. And don't we feel wonderful
Yes, we do.
as people with developmental disabilities when they offer us social transportation. But nobody's ever said, I want to get my son or daughter to work. How do we do that? They don't come and say that. What they say, and this is just as valid an argument as anybody else, they need support for the direct care workers. They need support for the direct care workers in the residences because we need to make sure they have places to live. And then when we get them places to live, then we'll worry about getting them to work. If transportation is important to you, you got to get in those meetings and you got to tell them they're not done. They're not done when they write a residential plan. They're done when you know that those residences have access to public transit.
Right.
Because we're spending federal dollars in the billions to build housing for people that isn't within the paratransit service range and zone. And that's not NFTA's fault.
JB?
Yeah, and
Sorry.
I want to say this to everybody, and I was at a meeting with Lori Kelly, the new commissioner of OPWDD, and her statement to
She kindly
self-advocates.
consented to meet with you?
Self-advocates in the room. No, she was there, we cornered her. But she said when we brought it up, transportation is a local issue as it relates to Western New York. So I would write Commissioner Kelly and tell her it's not a local issue, it's a statewide issue.
Yes.
It's a national issue.
I actually addressed transportation in the last statewide video conference. It was about a month or two ago. It was about employment services and so on. But one of the things that I addressed was the fact that no matter how many programs you can produce for people and how many work sites, if you can't get them there, they are absolutely no value. And one of the things that I addressed was the fact that there has to be more of a menu of transportation services as this mother is looking for her son. What else is out there? Is it just only transportation via paratransit or fixed route? One of the experiences that I had several years ago was to join a group of agencies in Rochester. They went as a group to Project Action's Mobility Planning Institute and talked a lot. I had studied a lot about transportation coordination. Essentially, they were 5 agencies who serve the needs of the elderly. And one of the big problems is getting the elderly to non-emergent medical appointments. It's difficult with paratransit because often you're left there over a long period of time, or you can't get in to see your doctor, and so the paratransit needs to drive away. And I'm not casting aspersions over here on this poor lady.
Trust me, I already.
But it
She knows, she goes through
I
a
don't
lot of
take
that.
anything, trust me, I don't take anything personal.
So
You have to.
to make a point, the other options out there are for agencies to get together, any of the agencies, and of course I have in mind the agencies that serve people with developmental and intellectual challenges. What you have is a group of agencies that my friend here and I look at day after day, with one agency having 2 or 3 people on a van going this way, another agency with 2 or 3 people on the van going that way, providing transportation to and from work sites at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. They're all poor when it comes to transportation funding, just like everybody else. They also lack a lot of the staffing that they need to be able to do it in a big way. The group that I was with actually produced a transportation coordination plan that now serves the elderly in our community with non-emergent medical appointments, and it's very successful. And what has happened is that they make use of all of their resources, so that you have the resources dedicated to each agency pulled together with a one-stop call center, pooling the funding, and also getting the opportunity to get the information from Project Action, because they will stay with you for a year. They will come to you in your community and they will help your group of agencies, whatever your focus is, disability focus, pull them together so that they can form a transportation that really reflects the needs of the people that they serve. I have a lot of positive feelings about it, because it is a third option, and we're finding in our community that it does work. It gets people to where they need to go. Glenda's daughter has taken a few rides with that group, and they serve a wide range of people. The only problem, again, is if you're over a county line. You know, that's another issue. And even though RGRTA has feeder, they don't have feeder routes, but they have services in surrounding counties. They don't have feeder routes coming into Monroe County or going out of. So that would be another issue that I would ask coordination of transportation to address. But I think it has great promise if agencies are willing to pull together and back up in terms of Project Action on Easter Seals Mobility Planning Institute. So just a thought.
Thank you.
Employment is an issue that's being very heavily discussed right now. The governor is being lobbied to look at federal reports with regard to the loss of jobs due to civil service. Because it used to be that the civil service system was the major employer of people with disabilities. and it is no longer. Which is one of the reasons why you're not seeing the percentages drop. So be in the employment meetings and talk about transportation as a necessary component to the employment meetings. Be in your authorities' faces, not just about paratransit as a special service, but all those other things that the paratransit, or that the transit authority are funded to do. One of my favorites is the rideshare program. Okay, they get grants to have vans available for people who want to carpool to work as a thing about saving gas and being better for the environment. To the best of my knowledge, not a lift-equipped van amongst them.
Wow, true.
Because if there was, the first answer to my question for you, ma'am, is to turn around and say, who does he work with? Who would come and get him?
Right.
Who would carpool with him that you could pay another, $10 a week to come get him?
Yeah, we've looked into that, and we've offered $10 a day, it's still cheaper in a cab, it hasn't.
How do you offer a service like that and then not have the equipment to do it?
Well, see, the part of it is it goes back to that knowing what rights are, knowing what you're entitled to. The authority is a Title II entity, all of them. This is NFTA, this is Rochester, this is MTA down in New York City, Cortland, Onondaga, wherever. They're only required to reasonably accommodate the scope of the program that they operate. If you don't know the entirety of the scope of the program they operate, you can't ask for a reasonable accommodation, and what you don't ask for, you don't get. So this is that thing about knowing. Do I expect everyone to be a public policy expert? No, but you gave up 2 hours on your Saturday to come here and talk and tell your stories. There are at least 4 advocates in this room who are going to take this information, go back to their offices, and I know that I'm going to be writing some stuff that turns around and says, look, this is what they just told me. I was in a room of 40 people and they said this. Because I absolutely agree that our commissioner, Ms. Kelly, is completely off base when she says that transportation is a local issue. I agree completely when we talk about the fact that the ADA is a floor, not a ceiling. If I can get the NFTA the 7.8 million, you better bet I'm going to be standing in meetings making sure they spend it.
Right. Thank you. We're coming up, go ahead. Did you want to add something?
I was just waiting towards the end, I wanted to say something.
Be my guest.
I come from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I moved here almost 5 years ago. We had, they still have a paratransit service called Access. Well, you were very lucky if you could access them, as they would show up. And I couldn't believe it when I came here that when I would schedule a ride, it would come. And I live right across over here. I know there's always problems and there's always changes that can be made, but unless you've lived like I've lived with the kind of service I had, I mean, I still have an image of waiting 3 hours in the snow for the ride to show up. It turned out the driver had pulled over and gone to sleep.
This is in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I want to make sure you knew that.
We're very fortunate with what we do have compared to what I've experienced. And I know there's changes that can be made and alterations and all that, but till you've lived like I did, whoa.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. We don't always hear good stuff about Western New York, right?
Love.
Yeah.
Barb, do you want to mention the hearings next week?
Okay, there is a hearing, let's see. You know
I
what,
have
I
it
didn't
here.
bring all the information, but I
On
do
the
know
Buffalo,
that we're
on the
having,
Buffalo Amherst corridor?
one's at UP, and
Right.
it's going to take place at 5 o'clock. It's regarding the Buffalo Amherst corridor. I don't,
Do you want me to give, I'll give it to you here. I have it right
do
here.
you have it?
Go ahead, just, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't bring that information, I'm
No,
sorry.
I thought it would be a
we were-
good.
Let's hear it for Frank.
Frank, you
Frank,
could've
come on,
just
here, you come
announced
out again, everybody.
Yeah, I didn't bring this information, but yes, there's, 2 open house workshops, next week. One is on the 19th, and that one's going to take place at St. Leo the Great School at 885 Sweet Home Road, and that'll be in Amherst, New York. And the second one will take place Wednesday, November 20th, 5 p.m. at Allen Hall, room 100, University of Buffalo, which is located at 3433 Main Street.
And the purpose of them are to
This is where you come and learn about the options for the Amherst Buffalo border. They're looking to enhance that service here.
The Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council has been asked to
Right.
hold hearings to get the community's perspective on what they should do to enhance transportation on that corridor. Are they gonna extend light rail? Are they gonna do high-speed dedicated bus service like on the Niagara corridor? Everybody seems to have a different opinion, so the Transportation Council, which is the people that are responsible for doing our mobility management plan, and they're the one that approve all of our JARC and our New Freedom grants, these are these people, they're holding a couple of hearings. So, you live in that neighborhood, you work in that neighborhood, you go to that neighborhood, transportation is important to you, go and tell them. I would tell them, and I will tell them, hint, hint, that paratransit's an important part of that of the transportation decisions on that corridor. So if I catch them doing specialized or commuter type routes where it doesn't enhance paratransit service, I'm gonna stomp my feet and start complaining. Okay? Just to give you an example. So if you have time to go to a set of those hearings, please do. Also look in mid-December for a town hall meeting at West New York Independent Living about enhanced paratransit services. Haven't set the date for that yet. I promised Tom that I wouldn't do it until after the CAC met this week, so.
In our last few minutes, I wanted to,
So, real
sorry.
fast, do me a favor, you'll send that email to me?
Yeah.
I maintain a webpage at
I was going to ask you
erie.gov.
to explain your office.
Okay.
And some people may not know about the county advocate's office.
Erie County provides the Office for the Disabled, and it's an advocacy office for persons with disabilities. We do a great deal of community outreach, such as attending events like this, and as well as providing ADA assistance, as Todd had alluded to previously. But if anybody needs any assistance or resources regarding disability needs, my office can be reached at 858-6215. I only brought a few cards, but if anybody would like my card, and I should have brought my brochure, but I can be, you can access my webpage at erie.gov, lowercase. You go to, you can click on county departments, I think it is, at the top, and then slide down to Office for the Disabled, click on Office for the Disabled, and just click around there. I actually have a guide to services, a 30-page guide to services within Erie County, so that's under the services section. So, but feel free to call my office for anything.
A good
Your
resource.
name again?
My name is Frank Camerata.
Frank, what's your name?
Camerata.
Did you bring enough cards, Frank?
C-A-M-M-E-R.
Who would like a card?
No, real quickly, I just want to throw in a quick comment that this is so important to do this, because I only knew about maybe less than half of what we're saying, and everything that everybody's saying here today is so informative, and I think a lot of people out there would love to be in something like it, but not knowing. And knowledge, it just brings the core, knowledge is power. being made aware of it is everything. So this is a great, great
For
meeting.
having a session like this.
This is great.
Before we break up, I'd like our guest from UB to talk a little bit briefly about your transportation research and project. See.
So, it's quite a bit to actually take in, and Jim is actually working on a paratransit project coming up, so maybe he can talk a little bit about that. But in terms of the transportation grant, we're in our second cycle of we had 5 years previous, now we're in our second cycle, 5 years. The previous cycle, we did a lot of research in looking at the physical bus. So we actually had individuals with different types of disability come into our lab where we built a full-scale simulation bus. So we were testing ramp conditions and also the interior of the bus. So for instance, wheelchair users, we studied different slopes to see what was accommodating for, what was good for the wheelchair users. And then also the interior of the bus itself to see what types of problems they have while maneuvering. Wheelchairs are getting bigger, so the current size or the current accommodations for the buses themselves are getting smaller. So that needs to change. So that was a major study that went on for a couple of years, and we do have all the findings that's sent to the transportation board, and then hopefully they'll take those recommendations and implement them going forward. So that's a major component for
Just
the
so that you guys know, UB is a major center for disability research.
It is.
Okay, we are known throughout the country in being able to get into projects like that and make recommendations that change the way we consider access in the United States. Transportation is the one that's run by the Idea Center by our capable friend Ed Steinfeld. There's also the rehabilitation, it's the KT Center now, the Knowledge Transfer Center. Used to be the Rehabilitation, Engineering, and Research Center for Technology Transfer. Federal money that's brought into our community that's used to create environments and make recommendations to policymakers about making stuff more accessible. So when you see something with UB seal on it, in an envelope when you get it in the mail, go to the lab, help the guys out. They give you cookies, it's cool.
And what does the paratransit research focus on?
Yeah, and just a couple of things to add in general. As researchers, it's always, at a university, it's always humbling to come to meetings like this because any changes that might come about as a result of our research are 5 to 10 years away, if we're lucky, right?
We need them now, though.
And we need them now, and of course, and so it seems like we can't do enough fast enough. And so, as Hemshan mentioned, in our first 5-year cycle, we did a lot on looking at different ramp grades, which could, for boarding and disembarking buses, which could have an impact in the next 3 to 5 years on what the access board requires for ramp slopes getting in and out of buses. But I mean,
what
that's
bus providers put into their new designs.
yeah, and so, I mean, and that's just one small part of the overall transportation equation. So acknowledging that there's limited, there's important impact, but in terms of the breadth of the challenges people are facing, we always feel it's not enough fast enough. But with the upcoming 5-year cycle, we do have a research project on paratransit to try and identify challenges that people might be having in that first and last mile. In effect, getting from house to bus stop to try and identify if there are environmental barriers to people taking fixed route that require them to take paratransit, or if there are system type challenges that might be related to scheduling or where the destinations actually are or are not. Try and get at that, because the problems that NFTA faces with paratransit are pretty much widespread throughout the U.S. There was someone did a large-scale study at the office, one of the federal offices was
it Mike Winter, FTA?
Yeah, I think it might have been an FTA study looking at paratransit around the country. And yes, the issues are, it's very common, some of the characteristics that
people are talking about today, you have to call a day ahead. There's a window of and a half hour sounds good to me based on the summary of that study. I think it was closer, a national average around 45-minute window. And it's all the paratransit or all the transit agencies have a cost of $30 to $50 a ride. So they're loss leaders, and they can only charge up to 2 or 3 times the typical fare. And so all the transit agencies lose money on paratransit. And so it's a challenge for them to try and think about offering more. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be done better. It doesn't mean we can't do better state advocacy. But in any case, it's to be sure NFTA has challenges, and and they're great you're here today and listening to those and so on. But the challenges are also bigger than just locally.
But they're gonna need your help in being able to tell the true version of those stories so that they can aggregate that information and add it to their research.
Yeah, and just one final comment on what you said about getting the information out to people to identify when these meetings are coming up. Is there a way, Todd, that if 40 people showed up today on a Saturday, how many, there's 200 more out there or 500 more out there who would have come.
Right.
But the idea of coming. So how can we get better informed about upcoming public hearings or where we can show up or specific considerations at the state legislature that might be coming up where it might be important or timely to write a letter, because I think we need some sort of common ground or common location or common conduit of information so that...
I think we need to get plugged into each other. We have an email chain.
Yep. Well, and Voice Buffalo just had this very conversation, actually.
Luisa Pacheco.
Yeah, about how to connect, because the senior citizen community, who is not very heavily represented here today, is also very profoundly affected by cuts and change in cuts in paratransit. So one of the things we're talking to Voice Buffalo about is a clearinghouse of information that we can operate that says, hey, we're having a meeting this week. Hey, this is when the NFT Advisory Committee meeting is. Hey, this is when the deadline for submitting testimony on that transportation thing is. Because a lot of people are putting it up on their Facebook pages,
Right.
Because they think social media is going to cover that. It doesn't go as well as we want it to go. So I think you're going to see something like that happen in the next 6 months, because we want to make sure that everything that our local authorities do, before I go to beat up the governor, I need to make sure everything's cool at home. I want to make sure that you guys know when all those hearings are, when all those meetings are, so that you can get to know Barbara as well as I do.
She's thrilled at that time.
Amen?
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I
That's
think
great.
that when you share your stories, whether they're difficult, when you share your struggles, when you share especially your solutions, and you bind together as a community that are searching towards just a better, more equitable, more sustainable environment for us all, then I think that you can get things done. And I'm glad to have Todd here. I'm glad to have representatives from UB here, Rochester. Barbara was great, and I know that her ultimate goal is to provide quality services. But to get them, yes, you do have to find your voice. And yes, writing is good, right? You're a journalist, you know writing is good. So I'd just like to remind you that we do have a fine selection of postcards down in our...
Down in the gift shop.
Shameless plug, I know, but the reason we're more than happy to host any future meetings on transportation or other concerns that bind us together as a community concerned with people with disabilities is that one of the outcomes of this Person First Forum is to make sure everybody knows that in the disability community, if you need a place to come and talk and be passionate, we want to help you along too. So thank you, Susan, Frank, Todd. Thank you, everybody. We're going to have the museum open until 4, so feel free to head on down. And again, thank you for coming out.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, shameless plug, I'm with this.